Stop imagining dinosaurs as animals. When it comes to Argentinosaurus, you need to start imagining it as a geological event. This was not just a creature, it was a walking mountain, a biological skyscraper that defied the laws of physics every time it took a step. It weighed as much as a herd of 15 African elephants combined. Its heart was the size of a car, pumping blood through a neck that reached the clouds. When it walked, the ground didn't just vibrate. It registered on the Richter scale. For millions of years, nature experimented with size, pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But with Argentinosaurus, evolution hit the ceiling. This is the story of the largest land animal to ever exist, the titan that proved life could conquer gravity itself. The story of how we found the largest animal to ever walk the earth begins with a case of mistaken identity that highlights the sheer absurdity of the animal's scale. In 1987, a rancher named Guillermo Heredia was walking his land in the Neuquén province of Patagonia, Argentina. He stumbled upon what he believed was a massive petrified log protruding from the dry earth. It was thick, weathered, and seemingly made of stone. It was not a tree. When paleontologist José Bonaparte, often called the father of Argentine paleontology, arrived at the site, he realized that this object was not wood. It was a fibula, the shin bone of a dinosaur. But it was a shin bone the size of a human being. As the team began the arduous process of excavation, the true dimensions of the creature began to reveal themselves, and they were staggering. They unearthed a series of dorsal vertebrae, the bones of the spine, that were over 5 feet tall. A single vertebra was large enough to house a person inside its neural arch. They found a sacrum and ribs that looked like the curved beams of a cathedral ceiling. The animal was named Argentinosaurus huinculensis, a title honoring its homeland and the Huincul Formation where it slept for 94 million years. However, the skeleton was incomplete. We do not have the head, the neck, or the long tail. But because titanosaurs share a similar body plan, scientists could use the bones of related giants like Patagotitan to fill in the gaps. The results of these reconstructions are terrifying. Conservative estimates place its length at around 30 to 35 meters, or over 100 feet. Its weight is estimated to be anywhere between 70 and 100 tons. To put that into perspective, the famous Tyrannosaurus rex weighed about 9 tons. Argentinosaurus was more than 10 times heavier. It was a biological singularity, a creature so vast that it seems to belong to the realm of kaiju rather than paleontology. The existence of Argentinosaurus poses a fundamental question of physics. How does an animal that weighs 100 tons simply stand up without its bones shattering? How does it walk without sinking into the bedrock? The answer lies in extreme biological engineering that resembles the construction of suspension bridges. If the bones of Argentinosaurus were solid blocks of calcium like ours, the animal would have been too heavy to lift its own body. Gravity would have crushed it. Instead, the vertebrae were pneumatized. This means they were not solid bone. They were honeycombed with air sacs and cavities, similar to the internal structure of modern birds. This structure reduced the weight of the skeleton significantly while maintaining structural integrity. It was a miracle of hollow bone and air, a latticework of immense strength that allowed the animal to be lightweight relative to its volume. The air sacs were connected to a complex respiratory system, allowing air to flow through the bones themselves, cooling the body and supplying oxygen to the massive muscles. The limbs were pillars. Unlike the bent, crouching legs of smaller animals like lizards or mice, the limbs of Argentinosaurus were stacked vertically directly under the body. This is known as a graviportal stance. The bones were aligned like the columns of a Greek temple, to support the immense downward pressure of its mass. If the legs were bent even slightly, the muscle tension required to hold up 100 tons would have snapped the tendons instantly. Its feet were equally specialized. The forefeet had lost their toes almost entirely, becoming horseshoe-shaped stumps of pure bone and cartilage, acting as pedestals. The hind feet were equipped with fleshy pads, similar to elephant feet but much larger, designed to distribute its weight over a wide area. This prevented the animal from getting stuck in the mud or sinking into the soil. Every step was a calculation of pressure distribution. The skeletal engineering was impressive, but the soft tissue engineering required to keep this animal alive is even more mind-boggling. The most critical challenge was blood pressure. Argentinosaurus had a long neck that held its head meters above its heart. To pump blood vertically against the force of gravity to reach the brain required a heart of titanic proportions. Scientists estimate the heart of Argentinosaurus would have weighed hundreds of pounds, perhaps as much as a small car. It would have needed to pump with a systolic pressure over 600 millimeters of mercury. For comparison, a healthy human has a pressure of 120. If you were to cut the artery of an Argentinosaurus, the blood would spray with enough force to decapitate a human or shatter a window. The walls of its arteries would have been inches thick, reinforced with tough connective tissue to prevent them from bursting under the strain. Fueling this engine required a digestive system that functioned like an industrial fermentation vat. Argentinosaurus did not chew its food. Its head was small, and its teeth were simple, rake-like pegs designed for stripping leaves, not grinding them. It swallowed vegetation whole. The food traveled down the long neck into a cavernous stomach, where it stayed for days or even weeks. There, tons of bacteria fermented the tough plant matter, breaking down the cellulose and releasing heat and nutrients. This fermentation process meant that Argentinosaurus was essentially a walking compost heap, extracting every calorie from the forests it consumed. Perhaps the most mind-blowing fact about Argentinosaurus is its growth curve. We often forget that these mountains of flesh started as something incredibly small. Like all dinosaurs, this titan hatched from an egg, and due to the physical limits of eggshell strength, that egg could not be much larger than a soccer ball. When a baby Argentinosaurus hatched, it weighed perhaps 5 kilograms. It was tiny, vulnerable, and surrounded by a world of nightmares. The Cretaceous plains of Patagonia were patrolled by voracious predators like Abelisaurus and Scorpiovenator. From the moment it broke its shell, the baby titan had to engage in the most rapid growth spurt in the history of multicellular life. To reach its adult size of nearly 100,000 kilograms, the animal had to increase its body weight by a factor of 25,000. It had to gain tens of kilograms every single day for decades. This childhood was a gauntlet. The parents could not possibly care for all their young. A mother weighing 80 tons could accidentally crush her own baby with a single misstep. Instead, they employed a strategy known as R selection. They laid hundreds of eggs at nesting sites, abandoned them, and hoped that sheer numbers would ensure survival. For the first 15 to 20 years of its life, the young Argentinosaurus was on the menu for everything. It survived not by fighting, but by growing faster than anything else could eat it. The vast majority of hatchlings never made it. They were simply fuel for the ecosystem. But, for the lucky few that survived the slaughter, they eventually reached a size refuge. This is the magical point where an animal becomes simply too big to be attacked by solitary predators. Once it crossed the 20-ton threshold, the list of things that could kill it dropped to near zero. Being big has a major downside: heat. An animal of that size generates immense internal heat from its metabolism and the fermentation of food in its gut. In the warm climate of the Cretaceous, Argentinosaurus faced the real risk of cooking from the inside out. This phenomenon leads to a condition known as gigantothermy. Because of its massive volume relative to its surface area, Argentinosaurus maintained a stable, high body temperature simply by being huge. It took so long to heat up and so long to cool down that its temperature remained constant, regardless of the time of day. It did not need to shiver to keep warm like a mammal, but it struggled desperately to shed excess heat. To manage this thermal load, the animal likely relied on its long neck and tail to increase its surface area for heat loss. Its circulatory system could divert hot blood to the skin, acting as a biological radiator. It probably had a slow, efficient metabolism that generated less waste heat than a smaller animal. Its lifestyle was one of slow, deliberate movement. It wasn't running marathons, it was a slow-motion grazer, stripping entire forests of their leaves with minimal effort, moving only when necessary. For a long time, it was assumed that an adult Argentinosaurus had no natural predators. It was a walking fortress, immune to the violence of the world. But nature abhors invincibility. In the same rocks where Argentinosaurus was found, paleontologists discovered the teeth of Mapusaurus. Mapusaurus was a carcharodontosaurid, a cousin of the giant Giganotosaurus. These were massive predators, reaching lengths of over 12 meters. But even a 12-meter predator is a dwarf next to a 35-meter sauropod. A single Mapusaurus could never take down an Argentinosaurus. It would be like a coyote trying to kill a bison. However, evidence from a Mapusaurus bone bed suggests these predators lived and died together. This implies gregarious behavior. They may have engaged in a terrifying strategy called flesh grazing. They didn't try to kill the titan instantly. They hunted in loose gangs, isolating a massive Argentinosaurus from the herd. They would take turns rushing in, using their serrated shark-like teeth to slice off chunks of meat from the giant's legs or flanks before retreating to safety. They avoided the crushing tail and the stomping feet, treating the Argentinosaurus not as a prey item to be killed, but as a renewable resource. They were parasites the size of school buses. The Argentinosaurus lived a life of constant, low-level harassment, a giant tolerating the bites of predators because it was too large to turn around and fight them off effectively. It was a war of attrition where the giant usually won simply by enduring the pain until the predators gave up. But if an Argentinosaurus was sick, old, or stuck in the mud, the flesh grazing would turn into a feasting frenzy, and the mountain would finally fall. We often think of animals living in an environment, but Argentinosaurus was so large that it created the environment. It was an ecosystem engineer. When a herd of Argentinosaurus moved through a forest, they did not just walk between the trees. They bulldozed them. Their sheer mass would have toppled ancient conifers and crushed the undergrowth, creating massive highways of open land. These sauropod highways allowed light to reach the forest floor, changing the plant life and creating opportunities for smaller dinosaurs to travel and feed. Their dung would have fertilized the landscape on a massive scale, redistributing nutrients across the continent. Their footprints, when filled with rain, became temporary ponds for amphibians and insects. But their impact went deeper. Recent studies on the gait of titanosaurs suggest they had a wide-gauge stance. They walked with their limbs set far apart to support their bulk. This gave them immense stability, but meant they could not move quickly. The top speed of an Argentinosaurus was likely no more than 5 miles per hour. It was a slow, inexorable force of nature. It did not need to run. When the earth shakes with your every step, Nothing stands in your way. Argentinosaurus represents the absolute peak of the sauropod lineage. After millions of years of evolution, the long-necked dinosaurs had achieved the maximum theoretical size for a terrestrial organism. Gravity and biology simply would not allow an animal to get much bigger on Earth. But this specialization came at a heavy cost. An animal that requires hundreds of pounds of food every day and decades to reach maturity is fragile in the face of environmental change. It lives on a knife's edge. About 90 million years ago, the climate of South America began to shift. The sea levels changed, and the environment became drier. The lush forests that supported these titans began to fragment. When droughts struck, the giants were the first to suffer. They were the canary in the coal mine for the ecosystem. Eventually, the specific lineage of Argentinosaurus vanished. The genus went extinct long before the asteroid impact that killed the rest of the dinosaurs. It was replaced by smaller, though still massive, titanosaurs like Dreadnoughtus and Saltosaurus, which were better adapted to a changing world. The Earth would never again see a land animal of such staggering proportions. The experiment of maximum size had been run, and while it was successful for a time, it was ultimately unsustainable. The biological skyscraper had been built, but the foundation could not hold forever. Argentinosaurus is more than just a record holder. It is a monument to the ambition of life. It shows us that biology is not limited to the small and the sensible. When conditions are right, life will push the envelope, challenging the very forces of gravity and thermodynamics to create something truly godlike. Looking at the bones of Argentinosaurus, we are reminded of our own insignificance. We are small, fleeting creatures living on a planet that once shook under the footsteps of giants. If you enjoyed this encounter with the largest creature to ever walk the earth, make sure to subscribe to Extinct Echoes. We bring the giants back to life. And let us know in the comments, if you could witness one moment in prehistory, would you choose to see a T-Rex hunt, or simply stand in the shadow of a passing Argentinosaurus?